Sal. It's really kind of you to invite us today. We're both going to do the presentation, but I'll do a bit first and then Louise will take over. And I will take my mask off when I'm presenting because I'm very close when Louise is not next to me. But at the moment we are, just because due to COVID rules. Thank you all for joining us. My name is Elizabeth. I'm a senior postdoctoral researcher here at Oxford, and Louise is a consultant clinical psychologist here at Oxford as well. Right, she's going to scoot off so I can take my mask off so you can hear me. Brilliant, thank you. I'm just going to share my screen now. If Sal, you can just let me know that everybody can, you can see it, that would be super helpful. Is that all okay?
Yeah, we can see it.
Brilliant, perfect. So, as Sal so very kindly said, we're going to talk to you today. We're going to do a bit of a whistle-stop tour of all of the things we're doing here in the Department of Psychiatry. And our passion has been for the last, well, I've been here a very long time, but our group lead is Professor Alan Stein, who is a world-leading child and adolescent psychiatrist. And our group, we've got quite a big group, has been working for sort of the last 20 to 25 years, looking at how important the early years are and what we can do to understand the mechanisms that are going on with children when they are experiencing some adversity. And those adversities really range from mental health problems to physical health problems, both in high-income countries and low and middle-income countries. And what we're always trying to do is understand what's going on and what puts certain families more at risk, and why do some children just do really well in the face of adversity, and how can we learn from that? And then from that, then really trying to work out what interventions that are scalable, which is where our work in low and middle income countries is really, really important, how we can help those families to make sure everyone's reaching their potential, and that we can make sure that children are really doing well in their long-term mental and physical health outcomes. So like I said, Louise and I are going to give you a little bit of a whistle-stop tour. So apologies if we jump around a little bit. But what we want to really show you is all the different ways that we're trying to embed this knowledge to everybody about the importance of early years for long-term physical and mental health development. So Louise and I always like to try and describe it, as do I'm sure many of you here today, is that we think that it should be a public health message, that everybody in the community, and it's quite a grand plan, but I know everyone shares this passion, that everyone in the community, from children to parents to everybody in all of these sectors that are on this slide, really do understand why those early years are important for long-term physical and mental health. So if everyone understood that, just like we all kind of know that smoking's bad for you and that eating too much fatty food is not good for your heart and your health. So we don't expect everybody in the community to have the deep scientific knowledge that I'm going to talk in quite in depth with you today, but that everyone has some understanding of that, so they can make the link of why this is so important, and so we can all advocate for why everyone should understand this, and how we can all do how we can do so many things to support child development. So one way that we're doing, which I'm going to talk to you first about, is some of you may be aware of the Brain Story. So we made a partnership with the Palix Foundation and AFWI, who are a philanthropic organisation in Canada. We were approached by them a few years ago, although we've been a really big fan of Nancy Mannix, who's the patron's work, of using the Brain Story to try and get this message out to everybody. They're being very successfully doing this in Canada, and we're already using the Brain Story here in the UK in Blackpool Better Start and also the NSPCC. But what we really wanted to do here at Oxford is evaluate and try and find the best ways of how we can get these messages using the Brain Story. So for those of you that don't know what the Brain Story is, we like to describe it as a free knowledge-based platform with resources that are available to everybody. You don't need a license, you don't need to pay for anything. But what they've done is we've taken the core neuroscience, which I will go into a few examples with you in a moment, taken the core neuroscience and packaged it in a way which makes it much more accessible to everyone, which is like the perfect solution for us to try and get, what I've been trying to tell you is embedding this knowledge with everybody. And therefore, in that way, like in my previous slide, we can have that shared understanding across all of those different sectors, and also that shared language. So we kind of all know what we're talking about when I say your brain is built when you're a baby, instead of people wondering, oh, what does that mean? Or the importance of serve and return, which I'm also going to go through with you in a moment. So the brain story is really based on this core story of the 5 metaphors. So taking evidence-based research, which a lot of it has been done by Harvard in the Centre for the Developing Child, but also from our own work here in Oxford as well, on taking that science and packaging it in a way that we can all understand. So one of the first metaphors, like I had just alluded to, is brain architecture. So getting everyone to realize that brains are actually built. You're just not born with it and that's the end of it, and it's a passive process. And that happens throughout our lifetime, from conception to death. Things are going in our brains. But obviously, there are very sensitive periods where those brains are being built the most. And of course, those are in the early years and again during adolescence. And what things are important in building brains. Serve and return, which I'll go through with you in a moment, that contingent responsiveness, that relationship we have with babies and young children. Why different types of stress affect our brains in different ways. The importance of executive functioning skills, or what we call air traffic control. So those absolutely essential skills in life for planning, prioritizing, impulsivity, and the way we can just do things all at once. And of course, resilience, which is something we are going to talk to you about today. It's a very trendy word that everyone bands about, but hopefully I will be able to present to you on why we think resilience, and the way that the brain story uses the term resilience, is absolutely so important, and a really great way for us to all try and talk to each other about the importance of the early years. So I think the best way, and apologies for anyone that's seen this, it's only a couple of minutes long, is just to show you the core story of the brain story. So it's a little short set of animations. Again, like I said, these are all free to download. Anyone can use them. I know health visitors use them already, and they're used a lot in Blackpool Better Start. But I just thought, instead of me talking the whole time and trying to explain what these metaphors are, I'll just show you this very short video.
Science tells us that the experiences we have in the first years of our lives actually affect the physical architecture of the developing brain. This means that brains aren't just born, they're also built over time based on our experiences. Just as a house needs a sturdy foundation to support the walls and roof, a brain needs a good base to support all future development. Positive interactions between young children and their caregivers literally build the architecture of the developing brain. Building a sturdy foundation in the earliest years provides a good base for a lifetime of good mental function and better overall health. So just how is a solid brain foundation built and maintained in a developing child? One way is through what brain experts call serve and return interactions. Imagine a tennis match between a caregiver and a child, but instead of hitting a ball back and forth across a net, various forms of communication pass between the two. From eye contact to touch, from singing to simple games like peekaboo. These interactions, repeated throughout a young person's developing years, are the bricks that build a healthy foundation for all future development. But another kind of childhood experience shapes brain development too, and that's stress. Good kinds of stress, like meeting new people or studying for a test, are healthy for development because they prepare kids to cope with future challenges. Another kind of stress, called toxic stress, is bad for brain development. If a child is exposed to serious, ongoing hardships like abuse and neglect, and he has no other caregiver in his life to provide support, the basic structures of his developing brain may be damaged. Without a sturdy foundation to properly support future development, he is at risk for a lifetime of health problems, development issues, even addiction. It's possible to fix some of the damage of toxic stress later on, but it's easier, more effective, and less expensive to build solid brain architecture in the first place. One of the things that sturdy brain architecture supports is the development of basic emotional and social skills, an important group of skills which scientists call executive function and self-regulation can be thought of like air traffic control in the child's mental airspace. Think of a young child's brain as the control tower at a busy airport. All those planes landing and taking off and all of the support systems on the ground simultaneously demand the controller's attention to avoid a crash. It's the same with a young child learning to pay attention, plan ahead and remember, and follow lots of rules. Like all of us, kids have to react to things happening in the world around them, while also dealing with worries, temptations, and obligations on their minds. As these demands for attention pile up, air traffic control helps a child regulate the flow of information, prioritize tasks, and above all, find ways to manage stress and avoid mental collisions along the way. Having this ability is a necessity for positive and level mental health. Developing effective air traffic control, overcoming toxic stress, and building solid brain architecture are things kids can't do on their own. And since strong societies are made up of healthy, contributing individuals, it's up to us as a community to make sure all young people have the kinds of nurturing experiences they need for positive development. To build better futures, we need to build better brains.
So I'm sure much of that information is not new to you, and you're all experts in that. But I hope you can see in that short video how it just makes it more accessible for people to understand why those things are so important for lifelong physical and mental health. So I just wanted to show you now what that science looks like for the serve and return, the contingent responsiveness. So what that science is, and then you saw in the metaphor of the tennis match how the brain story packages it. And then I'm going to show you a very short clip of a mother being able to use the science in the form of the metaphor and then apply it to her own behavior. So as a scientist, that is absolutely, and what Louise and I are trying to do, is trying to impart this knowledge on everybody in a way that it actually affects the way we think and then how we then behave. So this is the science behind contingent.
The key to forming strong brain architecture is what's known as serve and return interaction with adults. In this developmental game, new neural connections form in the brain as young children instinctively serve through babbling, facial expressions, and gestures. And adults return the serve, responding in a very directed, meaningful way. It starts very early in life when a baby coos and the adult interacts and directs the baby's attention to a face or hand. This interaction forms the foundation of brain architecture upon which all future development will be built. It helps create neural connections between all the different areas of the brain, building the emotional and cognitive skills children need in life.
So that science is then turned into the metaphor. So the tennis match. And it's not just a tennis match where you're just chucking a ball back over a net. That's what's so great about this metaphor, is it's that how appropriate and sensitive and directed these interactions are. And I think what this very, very short video now I'm going to show you is how that mother has understood that, why it's important, and applied it in her relationship.
With the serve and return, it's a big thing to just be there and communicate with each coo. And my little guy looks for it now. He just learned how to clap. So he'll clap a few times, stop, look at me, wait for me to make a big deal about it and start clapping. And then he'll continue to clap.
Which is just beautiful that she's managed to take on that and understood why it's so important, which is what we're obviously all trying to do. And because I'm a geeky scientist, I just wanted to touch a little bit more on why that serve and return interaction is so important and how we can connect what's going on to actually the child outcomes. So again, some of this may be familiar to you, but we've spent a long time in this group helping mothers who have experienced perinatal mental health problems, because we know that parents, so mothers and fathers, so parents who do experience perinatal depression, their children are at an increased risk of later issues. It's not inevitable, and that's absolutely really important, but we know that there's an increased risk. And why is that? So by looking and by doing clinical trials with these cohorts of parents, we can understand more, like I said at the beginning, about the mechanisms that are going on, and therefore how can we intervene to prevent those happening. So we have 3 core parenting capacities. And the first one, like I've shown you now multiple times, is serve and return. Contingent responsiveness, that warm, sensitive, appropriate way we interact with a child. And why is that so important? Because in that interaction, we are guiding the child to focus on something. And so in that way, we are building the child's own attentional skills. We're giving that child the predictability in that environment. And so then when a child is able to control their attention and learn those skills, we know that that directly maps onto children's later cognitive ability. The second core parenting capacity is that emotional scaffolding we exhibit especially during stressful times. So that warmth and consistent support. So when a child is experiencing frustration or stress, we're there helping and supporting them. And in that way, we help them regulate their own emotions and manage their own emotions. And we know, as you can probably think, that directly maps on later to child's behavioural development. And finally, the third absolute core capacity is treating that child as a psychological agent. And again, especially around those moments of separation. And what that is it's all of these things I'm sure you all do inherently when we're interacting with children, but it's trying to understand when these things aren't going right or they might not be happening, which often happens when we're experiencing mental health problems or addiction. And so that the ability to treat children as a psychological agent is that parent's ability or that caregiver's ability to hold on to their own thoughts and feelings whilst at the same time trying to understand what their child is also feeling and why they're behaving like that. And that also is all incorporated into the sensitivity we have in these interactions and the mind-mindedness that we have. So being the ability for us to treat the child as having their own thoughts and feelings. And I'm sure by thinking about that, so in a situation where a child may be very upset and crying, that you can also try and think, well, oh, this is a stressful situation and I feel quite stressed about it, but I wonder how my child is also feeling like that and why are they behaving in that way? And they must be having their own thoughts and feelings about this. And when that isn't clear for a parent, then unfortunately that does map onto the attachment security that a child has, because the parent isn't able to distinguish themselves separately from their own child. So what we're trying to do with the Oxford Brain story is embed this across the UK, and we are working with numerous different sectors, like I said, trying to get that public health message out there, because we want everyone to understand why they're part of that puzzle, that everyone needs to understand. This isn't just people that work with children, this isn't just paediatricians if you're a doctor. We all know 100% that we've all been children once. So we know the relationship between adversity and outcomes. So everybody needs to understand that the people they're helping, what happened to them as a child or not happened to them as a child will affect their long-term development. So like I said, what we're really trying to do is trying to find the best ways we can impart this knowledge with everyone and disseminate it as widely as possible. So now I'm going to give you examples of how we're trying to do that. So one of the most recent examples I can give you is our SEEN project. So secondary education around early neurodevelopment. So there are a few pictures here that we were absolutely delighted that the Royal Foundation was so interested in. And as you can see, myself on the right and on the left is Louise in the classroom. The Duchess of Cambridge came to visit us at one of the schools where we were teaching children, so key stage 3 children, 11 to 14-year-olds, the importance of early neurodevelopment. So 20 schools took part across the country, nearly 4,000 children took part, but I'm just going to show you data on 2,700 pupils in their change in knowledge and behaviour. And this project was commissioned and funded by Kindred Squared. So So what we wanted to do is we were trying to think, if we need everyone in the population to understand this information, what would be a really great place to start? Let's start with children themselves. We need them to understand that when they either become a parent themselves or they interact with a child, or again, work in any sector that I've spoken about, they need to understand this. So we put 3 lessons into Key Stage 3. The first one was exactly like I've shown you in that video, why neurodevelopment is so important, the fact that lots of connections are formed in your brain all the time, and with repeated experiences, those connections get stronger, and the ones that aren't used as much are pruned away, so neuroplasticity. And in the second lesson, how key caregivers are in these interactions and in this development. So how the role of the caregiver is essential day to day, and how those sensitive periods, so those early years and again in adolescence, the absolute importance of serve and return, and also playful learning. So as a child is playing, allowing them to lead the play, and then again responding in a way and narrating and helping the child enjoy playing and learning things under their own steam. And how we can apply this knowledge and these skills that we taught the children practically. So what would they do if they were talking to their brother or sister or playing with a child? And then we really wanted in the third lesson for children to really understand why this is important, and the real importance of that this is not deterministic, and some of the research that has already been going on and why this is important, and touching a little bit on executive functioning. So you can understand 3 lessons. We put it in science curricula because we really wanted everybody to understand this is not something that is optional. It should be in core science so everybody understands it. The children loved it, which is probably the first thing I wanted to say, which I'm sure any of you that have children will understand how important that was for us and how much the teachers loved it. But what we wanted to do here at Oxford as scientists was, did it actually make a difference? Did their knowledge change, and did they do anything with that knowledge? So we asked them 10 questions before they took the lessons and after they took the lessons, which are there on this slide. And what was amazing is on the graph here, so the dark blue is before and the light blue is after, you can see overall the children did learn something. Their knowledge increased after our 3 lessons. And what's really remarkable from our point of view about this is that I'm sure if any of you do have children in school, when children are tested on it, they are taught this the information again and again. Actually in this we didn't. We were quite mean in a way in that they did the lessons, then we just tested them. So they had no time to think about it in a lot of detail, and that was even more remarkable because they did retain the knowledge and they did increase their scores. But like I said, what we really wanted to do and in all our projects is having that knowledge, does it actually make a difference to what you do? And absolutely, and this was the most exciting bit of data that we got from this project, is that we asked the children before and after the lessons, if you had to look after a 2-year-old, what would you do to support their brain development? So the blue line here is before the lessons, and most of them could do a couple of basic comments. And when I mean basic comments, it was things like, I would read a book. So that's fine, that's great. But what was amazing afterwards, which is the yellow line, is that after the lessons, they could give 3 to 4 and 5 to 6 really detailed scores, sorry, they're not answers, scores on really detailed answers. So they would link why reading a book is really important, or why playing peekaboo is really important, because in their answer, they would say, because of contingent responsiveness, because of serve and return, because doing that makes brain connections form more in the networks in the brain form more, which is remarkable only after 3 lessons. Lovely, again, this just shows you that over nearly 2,000 of the pupils that did it said this should definitely be taught in other lessons. And again, a third of them actually said they shared their knowledge with other people. I don't know about you, but when I asked my two children what they did at school, they say nothing and they had lunch. But actually, these children shared some of the information about early development with predominantly their parents, but actually siblings and other relatives. And what we were so pleased with the SEEN project and why we were so happy that the Duchess took an interest, because obviously this aligns so perfectly with her centre, is that for that day when she came to see the class having these lessons, most of the media, from Hello Magazine to The Times to The Guardian, all wrote a line that said, we all should know more about the importance of the early years. So for us, that was just an amazing achievement that we could get that knowledge spread for those few days about highlighting the importance of the early years. And how does that help with trying to embed this knowledge throughout? So Louise is now going to give you a few examples of some of the other studies that we're doing and the information that we're trying to get out there about how brains are built and what things we can do to help promote these. So I've told you about the resilience scale on how we can build abilities and skills like serve and return, and in the video about those air traffic control skills, on trying to help everyone have a positive outcome and increase the amount of positive supports we can have in the families we help, but also how negative experiences can impact that. And that's what's really key to the brain story, and that how we're in all the projects we're doing, we try and put the resilience scale throughout our rationale, and trying to embed the knowledge in that if we improve some of these core life skills for people, so teaching them how important serve and return is, teaching children how important it is that children's brains are built in these sensitive periods, that in a way we're increasing the likelihood for a positive outcome, and that we need to increase the number of green boxes, the amount of positive things that happen in people's lives, and also trying to reduce those red boxes. So you can see here, even if we have red boxes and children do experience adversity, or as adults we experience adversity, as long as we're building those skills and we're trying to improve those green boxes, then hopefully children will be reaching their positive outcomes.
Thank you, Elizabeth. So I think that most of us are aware that COVID has caused red boxes of different sizes and shapes for most of us over the last 2 years. And we wanted to particularly explore these red boxes for very young parents during the pandemic. Why young parents in particular? Well, I guess we know that adolescence, so that means up to the age of 24, is the peak age of onset for psychological disorders, and also that pregnancy and parenting are major risk factors for mental ill health. So we conducted qualitative interviews with 21 young parents, mainly mothers, but some fathers as well, all of whom were pregnant or had at least one child under the age of 2 during the pandemic. I'm just going to give you a little flavour of our results and some of our conclusions, but hopefully you'll soon be able to read the full results and paper in BMC Public Health. So we had 3 primary themes. The data was analysed thematically. So around COVID-specific anxieties, loneliness and isolation, and disruption, perceived disruption to perinatal care. Rather than take you through each of these themes in turn, what I'm going to do is really pull out some of the kind of key recommendations and how these link to kind of clinical implications. So I guess one of the main changes for the pandemic for many people that you'll all be acutely aware of was limitations on the number of people attending clinical or medical appointments. And obviously that meant that many mothers were then attending antenatal appointments on their own. So this first quote is really about mothers' experiences of attending those appointments by themselves. And in this one, the mum's talking about how she felt that really impacted on her partner's engagement with the pregnancy and how that was different to his level of engagement in a previous pregnancy. And I guess the second quote again is from a dad, and again very much talking from a father's perspective, actually about how anxiety provoking it was not to be part of the appointment, and how they were really trying to stay connected despite not actually kind of being in the room, and really the stress associated with that. One of, I guess, the consequences of that was that mothers then felt a huge burden of responsibility that they had to take on board all the information that they were given in the appointment, and then be able to kind of convey that to their partner and to their wider family afterwards. Mothers talked about just how difficult they found to do that, particularly when there were complications with the pregnancy. They found it very upsetting that they couldn't necessarily answer the questions that other people in the family were asking, and also it was very hard to hear that information on their own. So I guess in terms of kind of challenges for us, thinking about, are there ways that we might be able to involve fathers in those appointments, even if they're not physically able to be there, if there's kind of further restrictions on the number of people attending those appointments. So maybe ways that mothers might be able to record the heartbeat of the baby, or other ways to kind of, again, make fathers feel that they're part of that. And I guess second kind of challenge for us is really thinking about how can we support mothers to be able to answer those questions, or again, is it possible to have a named point of contact for families to come back with those follow-up questions? Again, I guess it's a perfect storm of, again, huge staffing implications during the pandemic, and again, ongoing, I know, with the wave of Omicron, and again, just kind of from a real logistic perspective, how to make that possible. I guess perhaps unsurprisingly, young parents also talked about how the pandemic had affected their mental health, and really describing an exacerbation of anxiety and low mood. I guess what was particularly sad was that parents really consistently reported they found it very hard to access mental health support, either from their health visitor, from their doctor, or from specialist mental health services. And a quote here from a young mum, I think again, really kind of speaking to that systemic impact of when one parent is struggling with their mental health, how that can affect then everybody in the family. So I guess in terms of where we are now, the challenge is, how do we identify and support parents with their mental health, particularly those who are continuing to struggle when mental health services are already incredibly stretched and were so even pre-pandemic. And also we really need to be thinking about how do we mitigate the impact of parental mental health difficulties during the pandemic on their children's outcomes. Elizabeth's already talked a lot about the importance of contingent responsiveness for children's development. And of course, you will know as well as I do how critical that is for children's development, but also how that can be impaired when parents are experiencing difficulties with their mental health. It's very hard to return a serve effectively when you're preoccupied with your own mental health concerns. Of course, many people worked absolutely tirelessly during the pandemic to try and transfer services online in some kind of capacity. And indeed, some parents who took part in the study described finding parent apps or social media incredibly helpful. It was their kind of go-to. But I think it's also important to recognise that for some young parents, they really found it difficult to kind of make use of the provision that was there online. A young mother here talking about how feeling that the kind of the online appointments just didn't kind of quite hit the spot in the way that she wanted, and it couldn't really replicate that face-to-face appointment with her health visitor in this particular instance. I think the move to online services also risk excluding some of the most vulnerable, with the issue of digital poverty being a real issue for some people. So I guess the challenge now is, as screens become an even larger part of our lives day to day, how do we ensure equity of access? And I guess avoiding that kind of false assumption that when we put something online, that makes it universally accessible to everybody, and really making sure that we're not overlooking and neglecting particular parts of particular groups that we need to meet. So what about children during the pandemic? And again, thinking about the extent to which COVID is and has been a red box for children. A lot of our work that we've been involved with focuses on how we communicate with children. And just to kind of contextualize some of this, I just wanted to play you a very short clip of a child talking about their perspective on COVID.
I know that coronavirus means that I can't go to school and I can't play with my friends. I know it means I can't see my grandma and everyone has to wash their hands all the time. I know it makes people really sick and lots of people have died. But I don't understand why my brother is so grumpy, even though he normally hates school, and why my mum and dad are arguing, even though they think I can't hear them.
So I think that kind of beautifully encapsulates that children have really quite a lot of practical information about COVID, and they're very aware of the restrictions on their day-to-day life. But perhaps what is more confusing for them is the emotional ramifications of the pandemic and how this is affecting the behaviour of the people around them. So, of course, our kind of conversations have been absolutely dominated by the pandemic over the last 2 years. And children have been exposed to huge amounts of information, public health messages, but also adults' levels of stress and anxiety, which again, I think, like many, has kind of peaked and troughed at different points over the last 2 years. But what continues to be the case is this ongoing disruption to children's day-to-day routine in terms of their experiences and the normal protocol of settling at nursery or preschool, in terms of even those kind of preschool baby activities and social interaction and so on, which continues to be very different and again may change from week to week depending on who's isolating, what staffing levels are like and so on. Normally, this kind of these activities provide a real refuge for children in terms of kind of routine and normality. And so I guess thinking about the past, children were able to take kind of comfort from that kind of structure, but all of that has really been kind of wiped out or significantly altered by COVID. And these kind of activities are so critical to promoting children's mental health and resilience at times of challenge. Of course, parents would do anything to protect their children from distress, but children are incredibly astute observers. They really notice when conversations are taken behind closed doors, when adults are suddenly dropping their voices and whispering, or they're also particularly, even the very youngest infants are aware of changes in parents' responsiveness to them. Of course, children's understanding around illness and death evolves throughout their childhood and adolescence. So we really need to tailor our information to children's developmental level and understanding, because this is so important. We know from extensive research, not just in the UK, but really across the world, that sensitive and effective communication about what's happening in children's lives and about when an important adult is unwell has really important benefits, not only for children's long-term mental health, but also for family functioning as well. So just to give you a very brief overview about children's understanding of illness and death, I'm sure this will be familiar to many of you. Today, I'm just going to focus on the kind of the top left, so thinking about the very youngest children. As I've said, even infants will be aware of changes in caregivers' mood and behaviour, and when they don't understand what that's about, it will be perceived as a threat. Children, again, the under twos, I think, are a much neglected group in terms of thinking about information sharing during the pandemic. Will be very aware that they're not seeing grandparents who are often significant carers for children as frequently as they might have done, again, during lockdowns or periods of isolation. There may have been long periods of time when they didn't see these familiar adults. And again, that's going to make a real difference to children. Thinking about that 3 to 4 age group, at this age, children understand death as a departure, it's part of life. But what they don't understand is necessarily the finality or the irreversibility of death. So it's really important that when somebody has sadly died, you need to keep repeating that key message that the dead person can't and will not return. I'm just going to make kind of 2 points rather than going through kind of talking about what older children understand. I think, again, because COVID has been going on for so long now, it's also important to think that it's not been a one-off conversation with kids about COVID, that actually over the 2 years, children may have moved through different developmental stages. And so the developmental understanding will have changed. We need to revisit, check out what their understanding is now and potentially provide them with a more complete and a more sophisticated understanding about what's happening. Because it's so important, I just wanted to draw your attention to magical thinking, which is quite a well-documented kind of phase, most commonly seen between children of around the ages of 4 and 7. And this term is used to describe children's belief that unrelated thoughts, events, or wishes can cause something else to happen. So, for example, actually, because I didn't do what I was told and go to bed when I was told to, that's why Granny or Mum has become sick. So again, they can see that illness might be a punishment for their poor behaviour, when in fact they're completely unrelated. So I guess the key take home for this is that the language we're using when we're talking to children needs to be concrete and it needs to be specific to avoid any misunderstandings about why somebody's become ill or why somebody's died. As I said, adults understandably want to protect children, and they may feel quite hesitant or unsure about how to broach these important conversations, which we know are so important because they are directly affect children's long-term mental health. So how might we go about this, even with the youngest children? I guess a really good starting point is making sure that we're there available to listen and to also ask what children understand so far. That gives us then an opportunity to provide children with this concrete, specific information and correct any misunderstandings or misapprehensions that they might have. Of course, I think particularly in our culture, we often use euphemisms to talk about illness and death and bereavement because they are such painful and difficult subjects. But of course, these euphemisms can also create quite a lot of confusion. If we tell a child that a grandparent has been lost, then in terms of a child's logic, but of course, if we only search hard enough for them, we can find them again. So we really need to use those words dead and died and talk really explicitly with children about what that means. We also, as adults, need to be authentic about how we're feeling and to really acknowledge our own feelings of sadness, anxiety and frustration with some of the things that the restrictions that there still are in our lives and what we feel able to or what we're not able to do. This is so important because it provides children with a model about how they might talk about their feelings, and it really gives them the words to make sense of their own internal experiences. It can also be really helpful to normalise children's emotional responses to the pandemic. Yes, it's really frustrating that you can't go to school this week, or I'm really sad that we can't have your friend over to play this week, or that they can't come to your party because now they've got COVID. And actually that again validates how children are feeling. Also, as parents, I guess we need to try and recognise that all the impact of the pandemic is going to have an impact on children's normal emotional and behavioural responses to situations, so that we're reframing perhaps clinginess or unexpected kind of behavioural outbursts as an emotional response to the pandemic, and try and respond compassionately and appropriately. Although sometimes it's very hard to feel positive about the pandemic, I think where we can, it's important to try and model what we can do if we're feeling sad, or what we can do if we're feeling frustrated or fed up. And also give children to continue, give permission to ask ourselves questions, and really trying to keep open those lines of communication, so that children do have a worry, or if they've overheard something, they can come and check out what's actually happening and make sure that they've got the correct message. So we worked with Blackpool Better Start to develop a series of top tips based on a paper that we wrote that was published in The Lancet really at the beginning of the pandemic, talking about how we can talk and communicate effectively with children about illness to protect their short and long-term psychological health. And that's still available on the Blackpool Better Start website. Again, thinking, of course, that all children have been affected by the pandemic in one way or another, but very sadly, some families have experienced bereavement of one or possibly more than one family member during the pandemic, either through COVID or through something unrelated. And we really wanted to explore how children were identified when they had been affected by a bereavement, and the support that families were offered. So we had quite a large number of relatives and also health and social care professionals who took part in an online survey, and also qualitative interviews with both groups, again to try and understand a little bit more about this. So what was interesting, that nearly 70% of professionals indicated that someone in the team probably or had definitely asked whether the patient had important relationships with children. Whereas this contrasted with only 10% of bereaved relatives who stated that that had occurred. And very sadly, consequently, families described really struggling to know how or whether to prepare children for an anticipated bereavement. And indeed, most children were not informed that someone important was going to die. You can see from the quote here, again, the kind of confusion, bewilderment, sense of kind of stuckness and helplessness from this family about how they might begin to even tell a 6-year-old that his grandpa was going to die. Quite understandably, again, acknowledging the huge staffing pressures during the pandemic, professionals felt there was a lack of time to have conversations with children or conversations about children with relatives, and they felt that they'd actually often just had to signpost families for support and guidance. Whereas from relatives' perspectives, they often felt that it was difficult to find age-appropriate or developmentally appropriate resources for children, and that again, there was an inadequacy of services due to furlough during the pandemic. But of course, sadly, bereavement is something which continues, pandemic or not. And so I guess we are absolutely passionate that healthcare professionals understand the long-term benefits of preparing children for the death of an important adult. And so conversations about what children know and understand should really be part of all clinical appointments. We can't assume that a patient has or doesn't have important relationships with children just based on their age. Each family is unique and has complexity around who matters to who. So really, we want every health and social care professional just to be inquiring, actually, do you have important relationships with children? Which offers healthcare professionals that unique opportunity to reassure families that telling children is actually really important and can be protective in itself for their long-term psychological well-being. We absolutely acknowledge that these conversations are potentially emotionally demanding and very sensitive. And so we've developed a communication framework to try and support healthcare professionals with the skills and confidence to raise these issues with families. So again, we produce, this is pandemic specific, but we've also got more generic frameworks to help healthcare professionals and also families, giving them the words and phrases that they might use to give people really an overview about how I might open this conversation, what I might say, and how I might end it. So really just bringing you back now to the resilience scale. Hopefully I've given you a little bit of an overview about how our large programme of work really fits into this conceptualisation. We've talked about how we can support the development of community skills and abilities, which again is so important in terms of the position of that fulcrum or that tipping point of the scales. And really hoping giving you some ideas about how we can try and reduce or minimize some of those red boxes. So there's negative experiences, but equally how we can provide positive supports to individuals, families and communities to, again, mitigate some of the impact of some of the adversity that we've been facing in recent years. And finally, just before I finish, a very quick plug. We are currently hoping to develop a package of support for young parents who are experiencing low mood or depression. And so we're really passionate about getting some young parents to kind of feedback on some of the ideas and really shape those plans. So we'd be absolutely delighted if anyone was able to share this advert with their network. I have tweeted about it, and perhaps, Sally, I could be really cheeky and perhaps ask the Parent Infant Foundation to retweet my tweet so that you could potentially pass it on to anyone in your network who might be interested in getting involved. I think we'll stop talking at this stage and would be delighted to try and answer any of your questions about our talk. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth and Louise. That was an amazingly detailed and comprehensive presentation, and how much stuff you're doing. It's absolutely fantastic. So we've got a couple of questions, and I'd encourage anybody else who is listening and has got questions just to put them into the Q&A function here, but we'll start with the two we've already got. And in response to your question, I will definitely retweet. I think it's the least I can do.
Thank you.
So Kate Frith asks, regarding the lessons you did with the Key Stage 3 students, How did you deal with any triggers for the children, particularly talking about responsive caregivers and any deficits they might see in their own caregiving?
Okay, so we thought a lot about this, and I suppose one thing I should have stressed more about those lessons were we were always talking about normative development, and we were always talking about positive situations, because absolutely, as researchers and as a clinician, as Louise is a clinician, we're absolutely always making sure that we would never like you say, trigger anything, and also we're fully aware that teachers are under enough pressure of trying to deal with their classes, and you're not always 100% sure who may be affected by potential adversity in a classroom. So we did have support for teachers if this did occur, and in fact it occurred in only a couple of situations which were due to children who had experienced some adversity. But what the lessons absolutely didn't talk about was anything to do with toxic stress, abuse, or neglect. It was all about how we can build brains and how important all the positive interactions are, because absolutely that is not what the study was about, and also the lessons really didn't touch on that at all. Is there anything you want to add, Louise?
I guess the only other thing that we also had quite a lot of background materials for teachers to support them in terms of delivering the lessons, because they were delivered by the class's usual science teacher. And again, there was quite a lot of detailed information for the teachers there about opportunities in adolescence, again in terms of that other period of kind of brain development, particularly around executive function skills. So again, I guess a message of kind of hope rather than this being deterministic. I think what was interesting was we had a very small number of participants who in fact were in a very specialist provision due to very early adversity and extreme adversity in their own situations, and actually they particularly enjoyed the lessons. They found it very, very interesting, and the teacher who taught them kind of provided quite a lot of feedback that actually they'd really valued and benefited from the content, which was really reassuring, I guess, because it was a very important point. So thank you for raising that one, Kate.
Thank you. We've got another question about, I guess, the content of what was taught to the teenagers. And Claire is asking, do you think it would be appropriate to deliver the same content to parents who are currently being held by perinatal mental health services in group work or individual settings?
Yeah, I think that, so obviously the way the resources were produced were for a school setting. So one of our project coordinators is a teacher, so the worksheets and the activities that the children had to do are quite classroom focused. However, the knowledge and the information that we were teaching the children was actually at a very high level, and I think yes, it could definitely be taught to anybody, because a lot of this information, as Louise and I know too well, isn't known by everybody. So although we say it's for children, it was actually at a very high level for 11 to 14-year-olds, that, you know, they got neuroplasticity really quickly, they got resilience. So it was, again, quite remarkable for us that children just are such sponges at that age, that they really did take on quite complicated concepts. And obviously we did extended materials for children that were at a higher level academically. But absolutely, I think there is so much scope here to adapt loads of different training for different groups of individuals. I think especially like we said, for the children, we would always focus on the non-deterministic positive aspects of that, again just always thinking about triggering in those kind of environments.
And I think ideally I'd say we would very much like this to be kind of foundational knowledge for children, you know, kind of at the beginning of their secondary school career. But again, it would be repeated and extended as they went kind of through. And again, if you went on to kind of more professional training, for example, as a nursery worker, again, you would have kind of more of it as part of your NVQ, or again in kind of antenatal classes. Again, it would kind of be a building on knowledge over time. But we were really just trying to get them young and getting them.
So I guess if there's anybody listening who thinks, I have a group of young people, parents, etc., who I'd like to, should they get in touch with you? Is that the...
Yeah, perfect. The SEEN project itself is being continued by Kindred Squared and is being rolled out in other schools. Our work with them has stopped now because we were doing the evaluation and the development of it. But absolutely, if anyone's who's part of schools that want to do it, then just go on Kindred Squared website and they are happy to roll it out now. Obviously, if it's about different groups of individuals like that example, then definitely come to us because we can think of ways we could adapt that.
Great. Okay, a couple more questions about the scene stuff, and then there's questions about other things as well. So I'll merge these two together. Claire asked, you know, if it's been taught in any schools in Scotland, and Liz asks, did all the year 7, 8 and 9 pupils get all 3 lessons, or was it just a single year group?
It was school specific, so because we just we badged it as a pilot study because these resources have never been used before. It was any schools that wanted to involve could. It wasn't targeted recruitment, so it varied between schools. So we have lots of data which is on our website. So it was either taught in year 7, 8 and 9. Some schools did it in all 3 year groups. Some of them just did 1 year 7 class. So we just wanted anybody in the schools to do it. So it varied by schools. No Scottish schools did take part due to them following a slightly different curricula from England, and for our science data we needed it to be everyone who followed the same curricula. But it doesn't mean that it can't be used in Scotland at all. Again, get in contact with Kindred if you want to do some stuff in Scotland, but it wasn't because we didn't want to do it throughout the UK. It was specifically because we needed the curricula to be followed the same within the English schools.
And likewise, I can see Martha's from Wales. Yes, absolutely, we are working across the UK. In fact, we work internationally, so Wales is no obstacle.
Great. And on your teenage parents study, there's somebody with that name has asked why you focused on young parents for that study.
Yeah, so there's we know that adolescence is a time where it's a peak onset of for psychological disorders, so we particularly wanted to think about that, and also we know that combined with parenting and being pregnant, again another risk factor for mental health difficulties, so we really wanted to think about them as a particularly kind of potentially vulnerable group.
Great, thank you. And I think we've got time for one last question. So Rachel says your frameworks for supporting professionals, parents and carers around words and phrases to support children regarding death and loss is really helpful. How are you making that available?
So you can find that and download that from our website. So that's the Department of Psychiatry website at the University of Oxford. It's all available there. There's also some short animations as well that go with those. So they're available to download and share as widely as possible. We really just want to get those into the hands of people who need them. So yeah, please do go and have a look. And if you've got any kind of feedback about them, again, please do get in touch with us. We'd be really thrilled to hear from anyone.
Because we've made those guidelines for school teachers, for people that work in care homes, for healthcare professionals and for families, and they're in quite a few different languages as well. Everything we do is completely freely available for everyone. We never make, our resources are never, well, they're our property, but they're not, we don't charge, or there's no downloadable thing. It's just anyone that wants them, please share them, because it's absolutely, like Louise said, we just want them to get into the hands of the right people.
Brilliant. Well, we've run out of time, but thank you ever so much for a wonderful presentation. I really appreciate it. And we will share the recording of this for anybody who didn't make the whole session, or who wants to watch it again, or share it with colleagues. And we look forward to continuing working with you.
Lovely. Thank you so much, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.